Hey, thanks again for tuning in to the fourth video of the series on the salary projections. Jeremy here with Ray & Associates. So far we've demonstrated a simple example of how the VLOOKUP function works, and we've also talked about how to format a range of cells into an Excel table and give it a name, and briefly demonstrated how that table name can be used in a function as opposed to using cell references within a function. What we need to do now is circle back and show how do we get the salaries onto the schedule for each employee using VLOOKUP functions. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to use these as lookup values, and we're going to look those steps and columns up on the salary schedule. Okay, now you may have seen this in previous videos. It's not something that I've mentioned just yet, but let's talk about this. If, for instance, back on the first employee, if they're on current step 1, column A, ultimately we want to get their salary from the current year salary table. The field names that I put here just for ease to match these up to the tables, they're the somewhat similar format as the table names. Okay, so we need to look up step 1 in column A on the current year salary schedule, which is this schedule here. So we need step 1, column A. We need to get the 46,512 onto the certified staff worksheet. One of the tricks to this is, as we go down the columns now, we have different, as we go down the column for the current year salary, we have different letters for which column from the salary schedule is. But for our VLOOKUP function, we're going to need to know a column index number argument within the function that's going in the cell. We need to know a number, not a letter. Okay, so I have added what people commonly use and call a helper column. Is essentially we need to convert that letter to a column index number that a VLOOKUP function can use. So let me show you this. The table array for our VLOOKUP function, we're going to be looking up the step, but then we're going to need to know what column index number, which are listed up here. So we have 1, the leftmost column, followed by sequentially the next set of columns. So the table that I've created here is just oriented differently. We're going down the first column, we have all of the different letters over here, and in the second column of this table we have what those letters equate to in terms of what it's going to be in terms of a column index number. So A will be 2, B will be 3, A2, B3. Okay, so we're going to be, we first need to analyze this really to convert those letters into a column index number. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, I'm hoping that you'll catch this as we go through this. So the helper column, converting the A to a column index number. So let's start the function where I'm going to equals VLOOKUP, okay, tab to accept the predictive text. The lookup value is going to be the column, okay. We need to convert that column letter into what's ultimately going to be a column index number. So I'm going to arrow one spot over to the left to pick up that column letter, comma for the next argument. Now we're looking for the table array, which will be just this small little table. You can see if you look in the formula up here, we have this table was already defined in name salary column, so once we selected it, it recognizes that and substitutes the table name in instead of a cell reference range. Comma for the next argument. The column index is going to be column 2 of this particular array. So we will type a 2 into the function so that we are going to be returning a number, which corresponds to the numbers on the salary schedule over here. We're going to comma for the final argument. We want an exact match. For all my examples, I'm going to be using exact match. Parentheses to close the function, and I will hit enter. The other main benefit is this whole table of information. You can see it's got the banded rows and the standard formatting for a table. One of the things that occurs when you format something as a table is when I entered the function here, and it knew automatically to fill it all the way down the column so that that same function is used for each record in this table. Okay, so now we did what we needed to do, where we converted column A means column index number 2. And the reason we have to do this will be illustrated next, because we're going to need to reference this cell now in a VLOOKUP function to pull the salary. So let's go ahead and start diving into this, where again we start the VLOOKUP tab to accept the predictive text. We need to look up the step now, because we need to find the salary from the step first, and then we'll show you why that is. So I'm going to click on the step for that record, and we'll comma for the next argument. Now the table array, we'll jump over to this worksheet. We're looking at our current year salary table here. So I will select that table. You can see it correctly substituted the table name in there. Comma for the next argument. Now it needs to know a column index number. I do not want to just type the number 2 here, otherwise I'm always going to be returning values for the given step and then only column A. So I do not want to do that. I want the column index number is going to change for each employee. Of those 100 employees, some are on A, B, C, D, and all the way through G. So I'm just going to go back over to the certified staff. I'm still working on my function here. So the column index number it's actually over here in column G, so I am just going to arrow over until I find that column index field here in this column G. And since I've arrowed over there, I can see we're picking up the column index number. So for the one I was on, remember A was equal to 2. Alright, comma for the final argument, tab to accept the predictive text once I arrow down, parentheses to close it, and I hit enter, and you can see the formula populated all the way down the spreadsheet. And so the reason we needed these column index numbers is because sometimes, although we're looking for a particular step, there's almost 2 questions that we're asking. One is, what step are we looking up? And then finally, what column from the salary schedule are we going to be returning? And for every employee that could be different, which is why we needed a helper column. So in our VLOOKUP formula, instead of in the simple example that we demonstrated in a earlier video, instead of typing a number here, we just referred to the value that's in this column, because it changes all the time depending on which employee and which column they're on. Okay, so I will escape. That is the basics of how we basically did 2 lookups, but we used a helper column. One of the cool things about the way that I've been showing you about building these functions is over here we still need a similar function, but maybe we don't want to build it from scratch. So in that case, I will just copy this, Control C, go over here and paste it, Control V. Now it's returning all of the same values that were in here, which is not what we want, but we can double click this function, and remember I said it pops up the formula assist, and we can toggle through the different arguments and it highlights the text in the function here. Now there's 2 things we need to change on here. One is the table array. For 2017, we don't want to look up the current year salary table. We want to look up next year's salary table. So while I've got this clicked, the table array, it's highlighted here. By just simply clicking around, you can see that table array argument now changes everywhere where I click. It's replaced. Okay, so while I've got that selected, I'm going to click on the Certified Salary Schedule worksheet, and I'm going to arrow over to the table that we need, which is Y1_salary. That's the table name. I start selecting that range, and you can see it has substituted year 1 salary, the table name, in there. So I'll just hit enter for now. But there's another factor we need to change. For instance, if we look at this, it's going to pull step 1 of column A from that salary schedule, 47,210. So if we look at step 1, column A, 47,210, but since this is the second year and there was a step movement, that employee is no longer on step 1, they're now on step 2 in that same column, so it should return a value of 48,744. So what we need to account for is, right now, the lookup value is simply just pulling the step from over here. We need to change that so that it pulls the step but adds the value from this cell up here, which would either be a 0 or a 1 depending on the values that we had entered on our projections worksheet. So to account for that is we select the lookup value. If we click in here just before the comma separating the next argument, we will hit plus, and then we will click on this cell here. Now we do need $signs on here to lock it, so as the formula copies down the rest of the column, that it always points back to exactly cell I2. We do that by hitting the F4 key, puts the $sign to lock it on the column and row, and then we can hit enter. So now we've got the correct value of 78,744. And if we go over to our projections worksheet like I mentioned, and if for 2017 there actually was no base step increase, we go back to the certified staff and you can see this value here is now 0, and yes, in this scenario that employee was still on step 1 because there was no step movement. So we'll change that back to a 1 here. And that is how we do that. So the key points of what we did here was, for this VLOOKUP function in this cell to work, we needed to know a column index number for this function. So in this case we used a helper column. The alternative option is a little more advanced, but some folks out there, especially advanced users, intermediate users, would nest that function within here. So for this argument, for the column index number, we could have just used the formula that's in here. So to demonstrate, is I'm just going to copy the function that's in here, and I'll hit escape, Control C to copy that. So I'll double click on here, and I'll go to my column index argument. Instead of pulling it from this column G here, I am just going to hit Control V to paste. And so all I've done now, if I select that again, is I copied the VLOOKUP function that was in this helper column and pasted it in there as that argument. I think I can hit enter here, and now you can see if I were to delete this now, these are causing errors because I deleted the column index number. These functions are still pointing to that cell, but you can see that we no longer have an error here, because for the column index, instead of using the helper column and then pointing to the helper column, we just put the function that was in there. So that's how you would nest a VLOOKUP function within there and accomplish the same objective. But for the sake of keeping it simple, I wanted to demonstrate how you can use helper columns and just reference those within functions. Alright, hopefully you're able to follow along. I appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you for the next video series.